Hi everyone, it's Sam, NFTstatistics with your Proof Daily NFT Countdown. Gonna go back into Blur, talk about what's happening with the market on the back of the airdrop, talk a bit of a deep dive on the data behind royalties, talk a bit about sewer passes, and then some big sales that have happened over the past couple days. Starting with a market overview though, wow, we had a massive day in terms of volumes, 40,000 ETH traded, the majority of it on Blur. This is the biggest day basically in 6 months. If you wanna go to a day that was as big as this, you have to go all the way back to Otherdeed. The Otherdeed launch, which you can see was pretty massive. But other than that, this day is really, one of the biggest volume days we've had. Volume was really concentrated on Blur, 68% market share. You can see that's a lot higher than where they've been in the past. Now, one thing that's interesting is that ETH volumes are very high, but total trades actually aren't that high. Really nothing exceptional in total trades. Unique buyers, pretty much average. What that tells me is that the average price per trade has gone up a fair bit. Now, the other thing that I think is interesting is that the airdrop farming is continuing, which is probably a good thing for NFT holders. The reason is that airdrop farmers have put massive bids, just huge bids into Blur, which if you want to sell your NFTs, gives you a great price to do it. This chart's interesting. This is the total ETH in the Blur contract for people who are bidding for NFTs. You can see it absolutely skyrocketed yesterday, up something like 2x. This is Machi Big Brother, who we said is one of the top 10 Blur earners. He's back at it, doing a bunch of airdrop farming, buying and selling kind of at very, very tight spreads. So I just think that the airdrop farming is going to continue. And the main reason for that is that Blur only gave out 12% of the total supply of tokens. The community gets 50%. So that other 38% is going to be there for people who do the things Blur wants you to do. Here's an AI image of airdrop farming. It's kind of been AI season, figured I'd do that. The other good thing is it's not just volume, but the floors are going up a lot. The large cap index up substantially again yesterday. In US dollar terms, we're basically at the highest level that the large cap index has been at in 6 months. And it was really led by a lot of the laggards, Cool Cats, World of Women, Gutter Cats, all very strong. Those had lagged in the first day after the airdrop, but really, massive move in Cool Cats from about 2 to 3 ETH. Mid caps up 2.9%. A bunch of big moves there. The reason it wasn't up more is that a kid called Beast, the darling child of this market, gave back a bit of the gains, down 22%. Can't go up every day forever. Now, art blocks, again, I have this chart, basically pulls from all the art blocks as well as brain drops and other art projects. You can see again, AI projects, again, are the theme of the week. Most of the volume that was big was concentrated in brain drops. And there was one outlier project I wanted to mention that really rocketed, ON1 Force, is at half of 1 ETH in December. Right now, it's at about 2 ETH, so up about 4x in a couple months, but really parabolic over the past couple days. This is a project from the summer of 2021. I pinged the founder to say, what is going on here? Why is it going up so much? And what happened was in October, they announced that they were going to be acquired by a new buyer. They have not yet said who that buyer is going to be. But yesterday, they relaunched their website and they relaunched their Twitter, which was a sign to the community that change is truly underway. So again, this is just an old project, but that has IP that is valuable. Someone wants to buy it. It has a bit of a historic feel. I mean, in NFTs, 18 months old is historic. And I think that is driving a little bit of this move. Second story, Blur and OpenSea warfare. Now, I haven't done a deep dive on royalties on this show before. I kind of wanted to do that because I think it helps to look at the data to understand what's going on. Blur basically made an announcement yesterday that they will no longer be enforcing royalties on any project, old or new, above their 0.5, half of 1% minimum, unless those projects block OpenSea. Okay. Now I want to give a little bit of a history on what the battle is here. What are these two sides, OpenSea and Blur, going for? And I think that the battle is largely focused on big existing projects, like the Bored Apes, the Azukis, the Pudgy Penguins, and that's kind of where the disagreement is between the two sides. Just to give a bit of background on the data of royalties since Blur entered, this is the average royalty rate per trade over the past 9 months, call it. And you can see a couple trends here. The first is that purple line, which was that over the summer, royalty rates started to decline as Pseudo was a zero royalty exchange and X2Y2 went to optional royalty, but neither of those exchanges ever got really all that much volume. The real change when royalties really started to fall is those red lines, which is basically when Blur launched, because Blur was the first optional royalty exchange that got a huge piece of market share. Now, if you look at these lines here, look at the average royalty per trade on OpenSea versus Blur, and you can see that OpenSea is like at 5 to 6%, whereas Blur has pretty consistently over the past couple months been between 0 and 1%. Now, there are a couple pros and cons here. I don't think it's all bad. I mean, what Blur is doing is creating more volume. There's a lot more market making, clearly creating bids for people who want to get out. And then lastly, they have a 0% marketplace fee, so even for people who want to pay royalties, it can often be cheaper to trade there. But I think what we are seeing is that when an exchange goes optional royalty, the buyers and sellers are going to trend towards the lowest royalty possible. And I think that that's been pretty true across the board on a lot of these big projects. Now, the reason I say existing projects are important is because even though OpenSea has had something like 50% market share over the past couple months, OpenSea has lost all market share on those big existing projects. Now, if you look at the past week, Other Side, Mutant Apes, Bored Apes, Moonbirds, Doodles, all the kind of big kind of quote unquote blue chip projects, all that volume is really on Blur. And a lot of that, I think, is because of the optional royalty, whereas OpenSea has committed to forever enforcing the royalty on those projects. People are just leaving OpenSea for it. The market share number is here, 75 to 80 to 90% for Blur on those big projects. Now, one thing people often say is this is because people are upset with the project, so they're not paying royalties. But that, when I think of the big projects that have done really, really well recently, where there's a loyal holder base, I think of Azuki and Pudgy Penguins. And even on Azuki, where the floor price is now up to 16, and basically over the past 6 months, the project has done quite well. The royalty rate has gone basically down to the bare minimum for trades on that project. The same is true for Pudgy Penguins. This is Pudgy Penguins here, one of the most successful projects. Still, the royalties are very low. Again, this is largely because of airdrop farming, but I think it's really starting to bleed over into everybody. That's kind of the background on the data. Okay, so let's go to what just happened over the past day, or over the past couple weeks. OpenSea, as we know a couple months ago, said they aren't going to let this happen. What's happening with all these other projects where they have no share, they're not going to let that happen with new projects where people can adjust the contracts to block different exchanges. They said they're only going to enforce royalties if exchanges that do not enforce royalties are blocked. Okay. And that sort of makes sense in the sense that, enforcing royalties on Pudgy Penguins has been pointless. They only have like 5 to 10% market share. Blur said, fine. Blur actually said, fine, we are going to enforce royalties on new projects as well. Don't force us to be blocked. And what OpenSea said is, no, you have to enforce royalties on all projects, on everything. Otherwise, we're going to force you to be blocked in order for us to enforce royalties. And what ended up happening, if you think back to Tim Ferriss's Cock Bunch, Valhalla, is those exchanges, all the volume was on OpenSea for those projects. The same was true for Sewer Pass in the beginning. All the volume was on OpenSea. Then what happened, as we know, was Blur came up with a backdoor process where they basically said, we can use Seaport. We can leverage Seaport to get around your block. And after that, a lot of the newer projects were traded on both Blur and OpenSea. And Blur said, on these new projects where we are backdooring, we will also enforce royalties. So we had a bit of a situation where the newer projects had royalties enforced on both OpenSea and Blur. And when it was really even like that, where kind of the royalties were pretty equal, the market share was also pretty equal. You can see checks, a kid called Beast, Sewer Passes. Unlike those projects we showed earlier, these projects have had pretty even market share between OpenSea and Blur. So that sets the stage for what happened yesterday, was Blur said, actually, forget that. We're not going to enforce royalties at all unless you block OpenSea. So all these recent projects where Blur was enforcing are now down to 0.5%. Why did they do this? I think there are a few possible reasons. One is this backdoor process probably doesn't feel totally sustainable for them. Two, they're clearly in a position of power right now. So they're getting back at OpenSea saying, you know what, if you want to be on Blur, you got to block them. And they know that they have a lot of the volume, all the bids, and that's where a lot of the interest is. And then third thing, I think just the tech stack of rebuilding everything on Seaport was probably difficult for them. So they're taking this opportunity to change course. And that's kind of where we are right now. What they're telling projects is basically, if you want us to enforce royalties and not be at 0.5% like we are for all those other big projects, you have to block OpenSea. I think what they're really doing though, what the real goal here, and this is why I say it's about existing projects, their real goal is to get OpenSea to allow Blur to not be blocked as long as Blur enforces royalties on the most recent projects. I think that's the goal here. They want OpenSea to change their policy and make it so they don't block Blur, or they don't require Blur to be blocked even though they aren't enforcing on the older projects, as long as they continue to enforce on the new projects. It's a crazy situation. We obviously know this Seaport, backdoor is going to be a vulnerability no matter what, but it will certainly be interesting to see how this one plays out. The third story is Sewer Passes did their reveal. Now, the most exciting part here was they were going to give this key, the Dookie, to the single person who got the single best score on Dookie Dash, and that was an account called Mongrel. They also tweeted a whole bunch of other stuff. We don't have to read it. I'll summarize it for you. First is that Sewer Passes now have ranks on them, so you can see how well the score is associated with the pass. The other thing is that on February 22nd, there will be a new competition for companion trade. So another thing that could give value to the NFT that the pass ultimately mints. They said that 2% of the scores in Dookie Dash were canceled for cheating. They also said that their ecosystem grew 40% in terms of total unique wallets that own something in the Bored Ape Yacht Club ecosystem. Here are examples. You can see that the rank of the Sewer Passes were revealed and are now on the NFTs. The two biggest sales, number 58 sold for 25 ETH, number 97 sold for 20 ETH. So pretty big prices for these. The other thing is that the single key is currently offered at 2,222 ETH, pretty crazy price there, but this is a unique one of one in the Bored Ape ecosystem. You do have bids online on the exchange at 222 ETH. I think there are bids much higher in private, so that'll be a fun one to see how it plays out. And the last thing I want to talk about is notable sales. First sale, we talked about Skulls of Luci a couple days ago. Another one sold, a Sam Spratt, he has 50 Skulls of Luci, a very exclusive group, Vincent Van Doe, 6529. A lot of the big whales are the owners of it, but one sold yesterday, again, 66.69 ETH. Second big sale above 60 ETH. These were given away for free a year ago, so just massive returns for whoever had them. The buyer is Anonymo2311. You can see Sam saying, welcome. I'm really glad that you're the person who got it. And then Anonymous said, I think something that we can all identify with at times, when something keeps you awake at night, setting an all-time high is warranted. He was keep staying awake, wanted to buy this NFT, and he went ahead and bid it. The floor now is 100 ETH on these things. So, talking about something that has just completely rocketed, I think that this small collection is one of them. The other thing is Sam Spratt recently announced that he has a piece on auction at AOTM, and the current bid on this piece is 120 ETH. So absolutely crazy. Nice to see an artist completely blowing up. Congrats to him. Second sale, this Bored Ape sold for 169.69 ETH. Now, this is a unique ape because it has a ton of crazy traits. The gold grill is the most kind of noticeable, but also the merch shirt. Yeah, the Deathbot fur, the 3D glasses are a nice trait. And the buyer of this was Nobody.eth. I've talked about Nobody.eth a lot in the show. I'd say he's the most relevant whale in the game right now. He's just been buying a ton. I made this chart here. You can see all the purchases that this wallet has made basically since it was created, but there are just a ton of them happening recently. And even though it doesn't look that dramatic, everything above that pink line is a purchase for over 100 ETH. That outlier above 1,000 is the zombie punk he bought, but this guy's really just been buying ape after ape, other deed after other deed, and putting a lot of money into the Yuga ecosystem. And the last trade to talk about is this piece called the Standoff by Terrell Jones, 18 ETH. This was an all-time high for Terrell. The buyer here was Batsoup Yum, again, someone who collects a ton of grails, so nice to see this. If you look at prior sales for Terrell Jones, he's had sales at 12, 16, 17.69 ETH. So this is an all-time high, but not totally new. We're actually going to have him on the podcast. Can't wait for that. And then that piece in the lower right, I was just looking at his page. I'm like, I don't recognize that one. That's a new mint that came out 6 days ago. So cool to see that. Great to see Terrell's success. Really good guy and great artist. That's all from me for today. I do hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back tomorrow with more and every weekday. Have a great day.